You know, when you hear the name Hammurabi, one phrase probably pops into your head: an eye for an eye. For like centuries, we've thought of his code as the world's first great rule book. But what if that's not what it was at all? What if its real purpose was something, well, something much bigger? Let's dig in.
Okay, so first, let's just start with what everybody thinks they know. The Code of Hammurabi is famous, right? It's famous for that idea of retributive justice, what the Romans later called lex talionis. Basically, the punishment fits the crime.
And boom, here it is. Law 196. This is the one that really cemented its reputation. It's so direct, so stark. It feels like the definition of ancient, tough-as-nails justice. And honestly, this single idea is why we're still talking about Hammurabi almost 4,000 years later.
I mean, his legacy as this great lawgiver is so powerful that a carving of him hangs in the U.S. Capitol. He's up there with legends like Moses and Solon. He's seen as one of the absolute pillars in the long story of how we govern ourselves.
But here is where the whole story gets turned on its head. This is the twist that has scholars rethinking everything. What if this incredible monument, this famous code, was never actually meant to be used by a judge in a courtroom? So, to really get to the bottom of this whole mystery, we have to start with the object itself. We have to look at this amazing stone pillar, which is really our #1 piece of evidence. And there it is. It's carved out of one solid piece of black basalt, and it stands over 7 feet tall. Can you just imagine seeing this thing in ancient Babylon? It was absolutely designed to impress, to scream power and permanence. Now, of course, it's a star attraction at the Louvre in Paris. And the life this thing has lived, it's incredible. It was made near the end of Hammurabi's reign, and it stood for about 600 years. Then it was stolen as a prize of war and dragged all the way to Susa. And there it stayed, buried for 3,000 years, until a French archaeological team dug it up in 1901. Just wild. This right here just says it all, doesn't it? From forgotten pieces lying in the dirt at an archaeological dig to this celebrated icon of human history. The team actually found it in 3 big chunks, which thankfully let them piece it all back together to show its full glory. Now look closely at the carving at the very top of the stele. This isn't just some random decoration. It shows King Hammurabi standing before Shamash, who is the sun god and, more importantly, the god of justice. Shamash is literally handing Hammurabi a rod and a ring. These are symbols of the divine right to rule. The message is crystal clear. These laws, they don't just come from some king. They come from the gods themselves.
All right, let's actually dig into the writing on this thing. Because when we look past that famous eye for an eye law, what we find is a surprisingly detailed picture of what life was like in Babylon.
Okay, so this is absolutely crucial. Justice in Hammurabi's Babylon was not blind, not even close. It all depended on who you were. The laws draw these really clear lines between 3 social classes. You had the Awilim, who were the elite, the nobles, the Mushkenim, a free person but a commoner, and the Wardam, or slave. And as you can probably guess, hurting an Awilim got you a way worse punishment than hurting a Mushkenim. The whole code is made up of 282 laws, and they're all written in this very specific if-then formula. You know, if a person does this, then this will happen to them. And the sheer scope of these laws is just staggering. It goes way beyond simple crime and punishment. I mean, just look at the range here. You've got laws about business deals, like Law 102. There's family law, like Law 185, which protected adopted kids. Then you have the famous malpractice law, Law 218. A surgeon messes up, he loses his hand. And there's even a kind of disaster relief in Law 48, which helped farmers with their debt after a bad flood. This is so much more sophisticated than just simple revenge.
So all this detail, all this complexity, it just brings us right back to our main mystery. If this was such an amazing system of laws, how did people actually use it? And this is where the whole popular image of the code just starts to fall apart.
So here it is, the big question that's driving all the modern research. Did any judge in any courtroom in ancient Babylon ever look at this giant stone pillar to help them decide a case? And pretty much all the evidence we have today points to one shocking answer: nope. Yeah, the case against it being a real working law book is pretty strong. First off, archaeologists have dug up thousands of legal records from that time, wills, contracts, court rulings, and not a single one ever says, according to the Code of Hammurabi. It's just never mentioned. Second, There are these huge, weird gaps. Shepherds were vital to the economy, but they're barely mentioned. And finally, some of the laws are just odd, like rules for threshing grain with goats, which, well, agricultural experts say that's basically impossible.
So if it's not a law book for judges, what on earth is it? Well, the leading theory today is that the stele is a masterpiece of jurisprudence, a kind of scientific text about justice. Think of it less like a book of statutes for a judge and more like a textbook for a law student.
And here's a perfect example of how it's structured. Scholars think the code follows a pattern they call Mesopotamian list science. They would take a basic idea and then explore all the logical possibilities. So, look here. On the left, Law 215. A surgeon has a successful eye surgery. He gets paid. Then you just change one little thing, the outcome of the surgery, and you get Law 218 on the right, a failed surgery, and the consequence is the exact opposite.
You see, this structure is the same method they used in other scholarly texts, like lists of medical diagnoses or astronomical omens. It was their way of scientifically breaking down a subject. This explains the weird hypothetical laws, and it also explains why scribes were still copying and studying this text over 1,000 years after Hammurabi died. It wasn't a set of rules, it was a timeless piece of scholarship.
Okay, so where does that leave us? What does this all mean for Hammurabi's legacy? If his super famous code wasn't really a code at all, does that make him less of a big deal?
No way. In fact, you could argue that this new understanding makes the stele even more important. Its main job wasn't to be a rulebook that judges used in court. Its main job was to be a monument, a huge public monument to the very idea of justice.
And the best part is the stele tells us its own purpose right there in the beginning, in the prologue. Hammurabi says that the gods chose him to bring justice to the land and, quote, to prevent the strong from oppressing the weak. The whole thing was a public promise, a piece of political art carved in stone for everyone to see.
And in a funny way, it's still doing that same symbolic job today. Replicas of this stele stand in places like the United Nations headquarters, not because we follow its laws, but because it stands as this universal symbol for the rule of law itself, and for our ongoing eternal quest to build a just world.
So I guess the final question is this. If the Code of Hammurabi wasn't a book of rules to follow, but instead a deep, scholarly exploration of justice and a powerful monument to a king's highest ideals, does that make it more remarkable or less? What do you think?